restorative dentists there about 95% of the way through this custom healing abutment. And then the restorative dentists can put their final touches on it. Okay. So if we were to look at it, we have this space here that's being filled by the prosthetic abutment and the prosthetic material. So we think, well, we'll have the restorative dentist fill this space. But if we look at it really closely, the biologic width forms on the prosthetic material. So that's why I think that it might be our responsibility to get you there in a really advanced fashion, and then you guys do your thing. We, as periodontists, will spend our whole careers chasing after the proper formation of the biologic width. Yet, we have this tendency of sending the patient back with the traditional stock healing abutment, even though we know that the necessary aesthetic support and health is not 100% there with the traditional stock healing abutment. So if we were just to spend an extra 15 to 20 minutes of our time to create a custom healing abutment that has the same cross-sectional shape as a natural tooth anatomy, this is what we can send back to you guys, which I think could be very beneficial in not only having a nice architecture of tissue, but also visualizing the separation between the implant and the top of the gingival margin. And we can do that relatively easily because if we can extract the tooth dramatically, then the gingival architecture is looking straight at us. All we have to do is fill it in and support that architecture. So that's what we at PSP try to do for maxillary anterior teeth. Patient either leaves with a custom healing abutment or a custom healing abutment with a provisional restoration on it. And this is what they kind of end up looking like. And you can just see how very healthy the tissue is in between. They're taking into consideration all the parameters of the gingival margin, the gingival zenith, the papillary formation, and it's just a clean, healthy looking tissue. The other thing that the custom healing abutment does is it streamlines the restorative process. It minimizes the guesswork by the lab tech. It minimizes the blanching that you'll see when you deliver your final prosthesis. And the other thing that it does is it allows for passive insertion of the final abutment into the transmucosal tissue into that implant. This will help you guys easily discern that the prosthesis has seated appropriately, rather than jamming a final prosthetic that is unlike the spherical shape of the traditional healing abutment. So let's talk a little bit about how we at PSP are able to create something like this. It's basically through utilization of a custom healing abutment with or without a provisional restoration. And these custom healing abutments will do two things for us. It'll allow maximum soft tissue fill in anatomically correct form, and it'll also help support the gingival margin or the gingival architecture. So this is a scenario where a patient walks in with their own natural tooth and essentially walks out with a provisional restoration, which looks pretty darn good for a provisional restoration. So let's talk about the steps that we need to take to go from this tooth to this provisional restoration. So step one is implant planning. Take a CDCT, standard operation. If we take a CDCT, we can, in increments of micromillimeters, visualize the placement of the implant within the bony confines. This will help us determine positioning, depth, torque, stability, proximity to critical structures. The list goes on and on. Step two is, before we extract the tooth, take an impression of the tooth. That way, we're able to create a temporary restoration that looks very similar to the patient's original tooth anatomy. And being able to allow the patient to walk out with a tooth that looks very similar to their original tooth helps helps them feel less stressed about this unfortunate situation. So at PSP, what we do is we use heavy body in a tray. We outline the tooth with light body. We impress for a few minutes, and we've created ourselves a mold that we can use to create a temporary restoration, a temporary shell. Step 3 is probably the most critical part of this whole thing, because step 3 is where we're able to create the running room, the necessary running room, for the vertical dimension of soft tissue that's coronal to the implant platform. Okay? This soft tissue, this transmucosal tissue, is what's going to be sculpted and manipulated. So the positioning of this implant in a tridimensional aspect is very important. And the tridimensional aspect is apical coronal positioning, interproximal positioning, and facial palatal positioning. The other aspect to take into consideration,
How often do you use on xenograft on the space between the buccal plate and the implant?
so we're going to get that in step 4. So it could be xenograft, it could be allograft. Generally, we'll use a common, we'll use allograft. Xenograft we can use as stage maintenance. It's really a preference. I use allograft, Krios allograft. Cortical cancellous, but it's preference.
One has a higher substitution rate versus the other, right?
One has a higher
A higher substitution rate stays around longer.
Yeah, the xenograft does, but it doesn't turn over to potentially natural bone.
How does that affect the bone implant contact?
If it stays in place, it probably doesn't affect it very much, but if it does end up resorbing in that area and doesn't end up turning over, we could potentially have issues with bone loss and tissue recession.
You won't have that with allograft.
Well, you could potentially, allograft can also be resorbed as well in that area. So you have the potential of resorption with xenograft or the allograft. You're right, the xenograft stays in a lot longer, it's just space maintenance, but it doesn't turn over. Whereas the allograft, it eventually turns over and it can resorb. But like I said, it's kind of preference. I use allograft. The other important part of spatial positioning is emergence angle. This is basically the relationship between the implant size to the implant crown. These two things make up the emergence angle. And if you have a proper emergence angle formation, you can avoid undercuts in the area, and you can also allow space for the formation of a biologic width. So, as an example, there are some cases where if we were to use a smaller sized implant in a larger proximal space, but we can't use the buccal lingual dimension. If we were to have this example, the emergence angle would not properly have an issue with an undercut, and we also have an issue with the formation of the biologic width. So if we were to place the implant a millimeter or 2 deeper, a smaller size implant in a larger interproximal space, we can then form the proper emergence angle that we need to potentially avoid the formation of an undercut, and also to allow space for the formation of biologic width. Step number 4 is augmentation. This is soft or hard tissue augmentation. Soft tissue augmentation is not always necessary for immediate implant placement, but in my opinion, if you correctly place the implant, you're always going to have room to place additional bone graft material. And although this space can fill in with a blood clot, which inherently has necessary tools for regeneration of bone, the addition of bone graft material can supplement that potential. Step number 5 is choosing the type of temporary that you want. Will you make your temporary chair side, or will it be generated via CAD CAM? At PSP, regardless of whether it's chair side or generated via CAD CAM, we usually end up using a snap abutment that engages into the implant. What does engage into the implant mean? It basically means that we don't need to screw it into the implant to keep it stable while we're creating the restoration which is pretty convenient. So I have a couple of videos of chair-side fabrication of an interim restoration, and I have one video of chair-side restoration, and I have another video of CAD/CAM generated interim. And I think it's going to be easier to watch the video than having explained it, but I will show some pictures after this. Let me just see if I can connect to it. Next.
If you're in the Seattle area and you're considering getting fixed full arch dental implants, do not move forward.
So this is, we use Novell at the office, so this is a Novell video. This is basically the snap abutment engaging into the implant. You also have to adjust the level of the abutment to accommodate the shell that you'll put on there, which is what we'll be doing right here. The shell that's created is through the PVS impression. We fill that in with maxi temp, and then you can glue it to the abutment in this area. You'll put something protective inside to make sure that the resin material that you put to glue two together doesn't get stuck there. You'll use resin material on the inside. And then you'll cure it. And then this just snaps in and out, so it's really easy to use. And then they'll fill in this space right here with resin material. You'll cure it, and you'll place it back in. Now, this will allow you to use a specific tool to go from to create the screw channel access, so that you can screw the abutment into place. So you can snap it into place for making the restoration, but you screw it into place once you're all done creating the restoration. And then it's suggested to torque it to I think 25 or 35 centimeters. Stop it. So one thing to keep in mind about these interim restorations that can shape the transmucosal tissues is you don't necessarily need to have an actual provisional restoration. What's really shaping the tissue is this bottom part here. This is more of a convenience for the patient, basically. Okay. So this is again the snap abutment, and this is the temporary restoration that we'll create out of filling in the PVS impression with maxi temp, getting a temp shell, and then filling the hollow part and the surrounding parts with resin material, and then we can cut back and add based on what we need. And this is just a diagram of the snap abutment in place, adjusting it, and then curing the temp shell to the abutment, screwing it in place, and then this is what the X-ray will look like. A very nicely placed implant. And then this right here is the interim abutment that you see. This is if a patient walks in with a completely dislodged tooth or it's fractured and you can't really make a tooth chair side, what you can do is go through a digital workflow. So it would be a fully guided implant placement hollow part of the temp shell, and you glue it together, and then just like how they showed you on that video, you go through this part to create a screw access channel, and then you screw it down. So step number 6 is kind of the final step. This is where we customize the temporary restoration. And when we customize the temporary restoration, we need to accomplish 2 things: maximum soft tissue fill and maximum support of the gingival architecture. We can manipulate those 2 outcomes if we focus on 2 zones within the interim restoration that we create. The subcritical zone right here in like orange, and then the critical zone here in blue. The subcritical zone is generally concave to maximize the generation of peri-implant tissues, and the critical zone is generally convex to support the gingival architecture. If we were to place the interim restoration into the implant, what we would find is that these 2 zones are within the transmucosal tissue. This transmucosal tissue can be manipulated and sculpted based on the addition of resin material to the subcritical and critical contours. And this is how we're able to get a proper emergence profile in the transmucosal tissue and get this anatomically correct gingival architecture for a maxillary anterior tooth. So this is example number 1 of what these customized healing abutments or customized provisional restorations can do. Our focus is going to be on tooth number 8 and the coronal positioning of the gingival margin. They did some soft tissue work for these laterals over here, just FYI, so you'll see that in the next picture. This is a few months of healing. This is a few months of healing after the tooth was extracted, an implant immediately placed, and the site immediately loaded. What should be glaringly obvious is very healthy tissue, but the other part is the tissue is still coronally displaced even though we placed a custom provisional restoration. If our goal is to engineer the tissues to be in a certain way, why are the tissues right here after 4 months of healing? Because the goal during the first 4 months of healing after provisional restoration is maximum generation of the peri-implant soft tissues in the subcritical area and support of the existing gingival architecture. If we need to displace the tissue apically, we do that after 4 months of healing. Okay? And what you would basically do is, this is the critical contour right here that they have outlined, and then this is subcritical contour. If you need to displace the tissue apically, we would add more to the facial apical portion and lengthen the contour part of the temporary restoration. And what we generally find after 4 weeks of this in here is going from here to here. And I would say that looks pretty darn good after about 4 weeks by just adding a little bit of resin material to this area. Obviously, you have to do it in a very expert way, but this is what we can accomplish if we just allow our tissues to be molded by certain pressures in certain ways. And we can do this potentially before we even send the patient back to you. I would say that we probably will send the patient back to you like this, and then you guys put your final touches, but we can also collaborate on it together.
So it's like you're developing an OA pontic.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just screwed in basically. Another way that we can utilize these custom healing abutments or these provisional restorations is by coronal displacement of the tissue. And what we're seeing here on this left side here is a really concave subcritical zone and a very nicely convex critical zone. And what we've created is maximum soft tissue fill and support of the gingival architecture. But what they're trying to show in this picture is that we're devoid in papilla formation. So the concept for this is we should squeeze the tissue up to coronally displace the tissue. So if we
and certainly depth of the bite. If the patient has a pretty significant overbite, for instance, and the initial point of contact is very high on the maxillary anterior tooth, where there's a long protrusive contact, those are patients that we would insist on having really high insertion torque values. And to her point, having as much engagement apical to the anatomical root form as possible. But if a patient has an anterior open bite and that patient, naturally presents with a far lesser risk, we would counsel them the same way, but you feel a lot less concerned about immediately provisionalizing that case. I will say that the cases that you immediately provisionalize and you regret provisionalizing, because the failures are spectacular. When you have a occlusal interference and overload on a patient where that site's still healing, if you're really fortunate, the implant just becomes mobile. If you're unfortunate, you'll get bone loss to the adjacent teeth, and so you want to be judicious with its application for sure. I think a really strong argument can be made for the custom healing abutment in a lot of cases. Particularly bicuspids forward. I still like to bury most molars even when placing them immediately. I just feel like there's a lot of bone graft surface area exposed if you just make a custom healing form. But it's not to say that it can't be done. We've done it that way. I just like some of the videos personally.
Yeah, I think those cases with deep overbite, but that you don't, in order to mold that transmucosal tissue that we're looking for, the provisional restoration doesn't actually have to be there. It's really that custom healing abutment. So if we're concerned about a particular bite for the patient, well, we just create the custom healing abutment and maybe put an Essex retainer line over top while the area while the implant osseo integrates. And then we can consider like a scheme in that area.
Yeah, and just to add, but one last thing I would say is that, I haven't been doing this as long as, some people in the community, but 18 years in, and I'm pretty sure I have 10,000 implants placed. The number one predictor of implant success, in my opinion, is extraction socket management. And so if you're able to do that well with the atraumatic extraction technique, and you have the opportunity to support the gingival architecture through immediate placement, grafting, and fabrication of these, these tissue forms, these custom tissue forms, you really can do your patients a huge service, because those implants will certainly perform better in the long run than when you have to later make a placement compromise, or you may try to recover the graft, the tissue volume you lost by not grafting that site properly at the time of tooth removal. Yeah, so that's why we typically always ask for the opportunity to do that if we're going to be asked to place the implants, is to manage the tooth's removal.
These types of things, quite honestly, like if you're dealing with an implant that has a significant amount of recession, but the bone level is still intact, you can use these types of principles to actually regrow the gingival tissue back. You basically change the abutment out, put a temporary type of abutment in, but that one that's a lot more slender and that follows the principles of the concave subcritical contour with the convex critical contour. And what you find with your patient is that the tissues tend to creep back into the space where you want them to be if you just mold these restorations in a particular way. So even if we have an implant that is not necessarily successful in surviving, but it's aesthetically not pleasing, you can adjust these abutments into the subcritical and critical contour, and you'll find that you can get some sort of resolution in those types of situations. So they can do a lot. Any other questions? Tom, you're really excellent at this stuff, so it's a little game. Yeah.
On your slide that talks about repositioning that central incisors gingival height,
Yeah.
when you're adding additional resin to your custom healing abutment,
Yes.
or in this case temporary, how do you determine how much acrylic or resin to add without the risk of inducing like pressure necrosis?
Basically blanch. You put that tissue in, you don't want it to blanch for more than 10 minutes, and you can kind of see where it blanches. Also with experience, you just kind of have a general sense of how much you could add and how much you should reduce. So it's really the resistance when you put it in and the type of more studies on it. The concept of the critical contour and subcritical contour, they have a lot of case studies and they have some sort of randomized studies for that. But quite honestly, they need more studies. I mean, the way that the papilla forms is basically based off of the crestal peak of the interproximal tissue. So if the papilla formed that way where it was slightly devoid, well, it's probably because the crestal tissue is a little bit more apical than where it should be. So there's a possibility that with you squeezing it, it could be a temporary outcome, or it could last for a little bit longer. Those studies kind of have to be shown and proven, basically. But they have shown it in case studies it does work, but for how long we're not 100% sure, because biology is biology, and the tissue crest is going to want to be where the bony crest is, basically.
Do you take phenotype into consideration with that then? So if they have like thin tissue phenotype, are you going to be not as to try that?
Yeah, I think tissue phenotype will probably give you a better chance of squeezing that tissue coronally. But in those particular cases where we find a thin tissue phenotype, that's where we're going to combine that augmentation, or soft tissue augmentation, with the hard tissue augmentation to augment that soft tissue for us. So we can have the opportunity to displace the tissue in whichever way we want, because you're right, a thin tissue, that's a little bit tricky to work with, to be honest with you. Good.
Awesome. Yeah, so thanks, Juliana. Thanks for sharing. We're going to be adjourning for 2024 already, so that's 8 meetings that we had this year. I want to thank everybody for really your attendance and participation. We have 5 of our 8 topics picked out for next year. We're still looking for 3 topics. And I wanted to ask the membership, is there any specific topic in dentistry that you'd like to get more information on? And this could really be anything. It could be, we've done things in the past related to like tax planning, those types of things. I think that they're okay, but some people are already, there are different stages in their life in regards to that type of thing. We have one topic on, right now we're going through an exercise of implementing a technology stack of different AI into our office and how we're using that to try to recover time from administrative burden that we can redeploy in new ways. So that'll be one of our lectures. Another one of our talks is going to be for the office managers on your teams, and it will be run by Claire, our Director of Operations, and it really talks about how to draw the leader out of your doctor. Because I do think there are times where we fall short of being the leader that we can be for our teams, and when we run into issues with team management problems, a lot of that can fall back to us. So that'll be one of our topics. We have 3 separate clinical topics that'll be related to Pero to make up our 5. But does anyone have like a specific topic that they're interested in? If not, that's okay. I don't want to put anyone in the spot. But if you do, please let me know. We're putting together the rest of that schedule by the end of this year. And then we'll be starting again in March of 2025. And I hope you all decide to rejoin the club at that time. So thank you so much for your participation this year, guys. And look forward to seeing you all next year. I hope you have power when you get home.
You guys have power?
Yeah.
You guys get power? Okay. We were right in the center of that cone of safety. So we had like no wind. I saw birds like 70 plus. You're like, is there anything really going on? So we check on like Reddit and the news. They're Kevin Suzuki, he lives over in this corner. They're still not ideal.
That's so good.
You guys have a good day today?
Yeah, it's pretty, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.